Alright, so it looks like we won the die roll here. So definitely going to choose to play first. And I think we want to keep this. We don't have a green source, but we do have turned 2 Mausoleum Wanderer into Reflector Mage and Spell Queller stuff. So it's not the worst hand. 2 basic planes is a little bit awkward. Alright, so we see a fortified village come down for our opponent, so not really too surprising considering how popular Bant Company is, and fortified village is sometimes one of the lands that is seeing play in Bant Company. Could also mean a deck like green-white tokens, or even something else, but it looks like it's Bant Company here. So we actually drew the forest here just completely naturally. So just going to go ahead and attack here. And we're going to hope our opponent actually does cast something so that we can Spell Queller it and just make use of our mana. We don't really want to run out a naked Reflector Mage here. Alright, here's the Sylvan Advocate. So yeah, we are just gonna Spell Queller it. And we're kind of hoping to draw something other than Reflector Mage to cast here, but we just have Reflector Mage. So that's a little bit unfortunate. So we've got a bit of a choice here in terms of what we actually want to do. But I think we just play Reflector Mage. It's not the greatest thing in the world, but we don't have anything else we can do. So if our opponent has a Reflector Mage of their own, they could hit our Spell Queller. But it looks like it's going to be a Selfless Spirit coming down. So that's not too bad. And our draw step is Rattle Chain. So I like actually just going ahead now and Reflector Maging this Selfless Spirit. And now we get in for a nice chunk of damage. We don't have to play the Rattle Chains here. We can hold it back, which I like better, in case our opponent tries to play a Reflector Mage of their own. Mausoleum Wanderer also represents a counterspell for Collected Company. Here's Tireless Tracker. And our opponent is going to get a clue with it. So now we've got a bit of a choice in terms of if we want to play the Rattle Chains this turn or not. I kind of like playing it this turn, so let's go ahead and play the Rattle Chains here. And I think our opponent's probably going to be too far behind to make use of this Tireless Tracker. But we'll see. Because we do have 9 damage in play, so our opponent is probably going to have to block here. But we'll see. We also just drew Summary Dismissal, which is great, but it looks like, yeah, that's just going to be enough to force our opponent to concede the first game. So that was a pretty impressive start. Our opponent didn't do a ton, admittedly. So looking at the board, we don't have to do too much against Bant Company. It's one of the pretty good matchups for this deck. The Hallowed Moonlight can come in against our opponent's copies of Company, and I also like the Ojutai's Command. Tragic Arrogance is another card we can consider. Dispel is pretty reasonable. We don't need the Summary Dismissal, and we can also board out a copy of Clash of Wills. And then the Selfless Spirits we can also shave on because our opponent's not really playing mass removal. So we can board in Tragic here. We can board in one Tragic. And yep, this is a pretty good configuration against Bant Company. So we're going to try this out. Bygone Bishop is another card we can consider. I think it's a little bit better on the play. So we can definitely see what happens for this game. If we need to play game 3, we can definitely consider that. I am going to keep this. It's a 2-land hand, but the Mausoleum Wanderers are definitely capable of doing some serious work. So we're going to keep and sometimes this deck, the sequencing of lands is important. We have to get an island here that's going to allow us to play the Mausoleum Wanderer. And our opponent also has a Spirit of their own, it looks like. So unfortunately, we have yet to draw that third land, which is going to be pretty important. It's funny, we boarded out 2 Selfless Spirits, and we've drawn the only 2 in our deck this game. So, alright, yep, this is going to be a Reflector Mage, which is pretty good here. It's going to allow our opponent to gain the tempo initiative. But we can play our own Selfless Spirit here and hopefully draw another land. That would be nice. It is another land, however, it's a basic plains. I think we can now pass the turn. We've got the Nebelgast Herald, and we've got Spell Queller in hand. Although our opponent's got perfect mana, it looks like. So I think we just take this, and we have Spell Queller mana up. But it looks like our opponent isn't casting anything, so now we can just flash in the Nebelgast Herald. But if our opponent has a Collected Company, it's definitely going to be very good here. Spell Queller would also be good. But it looks like the Herald is in, so we'll see if our opponent has something here to do on their end step or not. Alright, we are being allowed to untap, so we still did not draw the land we wanted. So I like just passing here. We can hold up Spell Queller, and we'll see if our opponent decides to make a move here or not. Alright, so it looks like our opponent is going to attack with the Selfless Spirit and the Reflector Mage. So I'm fine with just blocking with our Nebelgast Herald and holding up the Spell Queller here. It's kind of a weird game, but since our opponent hasn't cast anything, we can just run out the Spell Queller. This might cause our opponent to play their own Spell Queller. I'm not sure. We'll see. Okay, it looks like not. So now we can just go ahead and play this Mausoleum Wanderer. Although that's gonna... Okay, that's gonna cause our opponent to cast Ojutai's Command. So our opponent did have Ojutai's Command, it looks like the whole time, essentially. But just was choosing not to play it. So we're in a fine spot, depending on what our opponent has in hand. We definitely haven't gotten off to a fast start by any means. And this could be a company, if it is, that's potentially very bad. There's a lot of cards our opponent can hit here that are going to be problematic. Alright, so it's going to be Reflector Mage and Tireless Tracker. So we'll see what our opponent elects to Reflector Mage. I would think it would be the Spell Queller, but you never know. The Spell Queller can block more efficiently, so there's arguments both ways. As it turns out, by our opponent bouncing the Selfless Spirit, we do have two of them in hand, so it is a bit annoying. But we can just play our own Reflector Mage this turn and bounce our opponent's Tireless Tracker. We're just kind of hoping to stabilize a little bit so we can actually play the cards in our hand. But we may not get a chance to do that depending on what our opponent has. We would definitely like a land here. Okay, so we got it. So now we can pass with Ojutai's Command at the ready for that Tireless Tracker. But, okay, our opponent has Archangel Avacyn, so that's even more of a problem than the Tracker, so I think we should just go ahead and counter this and draw a card. And so that is going to get us a Collected Company, but we're still missing green mana, so can't use it right now, unfortunately. And this Tireless Tracker is going to be an issue because it's going to allow our opponent to draw a bunch of cards, and now we see the Evolving Wilds to go along with it. And unfortunately, we don't have enough pressure to be able to prevent our opponent from getting a lot of card advantage from this Tireless Tracker. So we're not in a great spot here. I think I like trying to start to make a move with an attack, but it may not work out very well for us. We have the ability to flash in Rattle Chains and then flash in another spirit after it. So I think we're fine with just passing the turn here. But this Tireless Tracker is going to hit pretty hard. So I don't really like our position in this game. And our opponent's actually just going to go for an all-out attack here, so I'm going to go ahead and play the Rattle Chains. And we can also play another Spirit here. And it's pretty much between Selfless Spirit and Anafenza, but I like playing the Anafenza to make our Rattle Chains bigger. Although, sorry, this isn't going to make our Rattle Chains bigger this turn. So, we can gang block the Tireless Tracker here, or we can just simply block Reflector Mage. So, neither of the prospects are good. But I think we go ahead and try to get a Reflector Mage off the table by double blocking it and then blocking the other Reflector Mage here. So if this works out, we're still not in a great position, but okay, it looks like our opponent has another company, and that's going to hit Nissa. Although I believe our opponent has already played a land for the turn. So that's going to mean that Nissa's at least not able to flip this turn. But the Tireless Tracker is going to become a 6-power creature, which is huge. And we don't really have any great plays here. Actually, we didn't need to play that because we have the Rattle Chains. We can flash in the Selfless Spirit whenever we want. That was maybe a little bit hasty on my part, but I think we want to pressure our opponent here as much as possible. So I like just getting in for a big attack here. And we can have Mausoleum Wanderer and Dispel at the ready. So it looks like our opponent's moving to flip the Nissa Vastwood Seer here. So if our opponent doesn't have much in hand, we're still in this. We're not out of it yet. The Reflector Mage is pretty good. I'm guessing our opponent's going to target the Selfless Spirit, so what we can do is we can flash in our Mausoleum Wanderer here, and then give our creatures indestructibility. So I think I like that play. And we'll see if our opponent has something like another Reflector Mage, we would definitely be dead. But we're going to give our creatures indestructibility. That's going to allow the Mausoleum Wanderer to jump in front of the Tireless Tracker. Our opponent does still have 2 clues which they can use, so we'll see if if those end up getting used here. Alright, so we're down to 4. Our opponent's down to 10, though. Oh, but it's Tragic Arrogance, and of course, we can't dispel that. So, it's pretty unfortunate. We can we can sacrifice the Mausoleum Wanderer, but our opponent, it looks like, is just going to pay for this Tragic Arrogance. So the Tragic Arrogance is going to happen, and that's going to leave our opponent with a Tireless Tracker still in play, and we're probably going to be left with the Reflector Mage, I would guess. Yeah, Tragic Arrogance is one of the few non-creature spells that cannot be countered with Dispel out of the Bant Company deck. So let's go ahead and see what we can find off this Collected Company. Alright, we did find a Reflector Mage and a Nebelgast Herald. So we're going to play both of those. That's going to allow us to get this Tireless Tracker back in our opponent's hand, which is a nice start. And I actually think we want to just try to attack our opponent rather than going after the Nissa. So let's try it. It's definitely a little bit of a risky line here, but we have our back up against the wall a little bit. Nissa's going to reveal an Evolving Wilds here. Sylvan Advocate is actually a lethal threat, and the Selfless Spirit is a pretty good blocker for our opponent, but we do have the Nebelgast Herald, which we can potentially leverage here to our advantage. So I like just going ahead and leading here with Selfless Spirit to tap down our opponent's Selfless Spirit. And now we're just going to go straight at our opponent. So that's going to drop our opponent down to 4 here. So things are kind of turning around. We know that our opponent has a Tireless Tracker and a Nissa, so that can mean more gas. And it looks like 2 Tireless Trackers because there was another one revealed off of the Nissa, and it looks like here's a replacement copy of Nissa Vastwood Seer, which is going to resolve, and it looks like our opponent's going to flip it, although I wonder if our opponent wants to get one of these Tireless Trackers on the board to get some clues going first. But we've actually flipped this game around quite nicely. Alright, so this Nissa's going to flip, and a Spell Queller is going to be revealed off of the Nissa, so that's definitely problematic here. And here's Declaration in Stone on the Nebelgast Herald. So what we can do is we can play the Rattle Chains, but that's not really going to do anything, so because we know our opponent has the Spell Queller in hand. So we're just going to let this resolve and get a clue. And we're forced to chump the Tireless Tracker. So we could flash in the Rattle Chains here, but we know that our opponent has Spell Queller in hand. So there really isn't a reason to do so. And unfortunately, we just bricked off. We hit 2 lands in a row. So that was pretty much worst case scenario. So at this point, we're just kind of forced to pass the turn. And now the Spell Queller is going to come in on our opponent's side of the board. So both of these Tireless Trackers are coming down. The Nissa is going to flip a land, so that's going to be 2 clues. And things are looking pretty grim at the moment. So it looks like our opponent's actually not going to attack here at all. So we can flash in the Rattle Chains. So let's do that. And this way, if we do draw something like a Nebelcast or a Reflector Mage, we can still potentially win depending on what our opponent has. But we know that since our opponent has these Tireless Trackers and clues, we're basically not going to be in any better spot next turn. We're going to be in a way worse spot. So we are hoping to top deck something. Avacyn would be good. Reflector Mage, Nebelgast. Rattle Chains. It's not the best draw for us. So I think we're forced to pass back here, but it's not looking promising. We were in a really bad position early, and we kind of fought our way back to be in a reasonable spot. And now the tables have turned again. So here's a declaration in stone. We can try to stop that from happening with a Rattle Chain, so let's try it. It looks like our opponent's tapping a bunch of mana. Unclear exactly what this is going to be. Okay, it's a Clash of Wills. So we can dispel that. And so now our Rattle Chains is going to resolve. And our opponent, well, it depends what they have. So our opponent just flipped a Collected Company, which is bad news. So the Collected Company is now going to get cast, and it's going to hit Spell Queller and Dustwatch Recruiter. So Alright, our opponent's attacking with everything, which is very aggressive. I'm not sure if this was the correct play. So what we can do now is we actually have some pretty good blocks. So we can block our opponent's big creatures, and what we can do is we can sacrifice the Selfless Spirit to give all of our creatures indestructibility. So that's going to bring us down to 2, but now our opponent does need to have something in order to prevent us from winning, and it looks like our opponent doesn't. So it looks like that all-out attack was a misstep, and that's just going to be the match. Wow. Okay.